you are
I'm Russell Ruderman. I'm a state senator from Puna District. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to testify. I'll be as brief as possible.
Thank you.
I won't waste
Thank you
your
very
time.
much.
Excuse me, could you ask Senator Ruderman to speak up?
Thank you.
He's not loud.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you want to turn around, you can sideways. I don't.
I want to do what's best for
Okay.
folks here. I don't know. I will speak. I'm here to represent my constituents who have a right to vote that was denied in the last 2 weeks to hundreds and possibly thousands of them. I'm not presuming, despite my loose-lipped statements in the press earlier this week, I do not presume to suggest to you which actions should be taken. Who should stay, who should go, what should change. That's your job to know that. I certainly don't know that. I've never met Mr. Nago. I'm sure he's a very good person. I don't think anybody involved had any ill intent along the way. But I'm here to report serious problems that occurred with the elections that apparently, even to this day, are not understood here. And they affected my district and my constituents greatly. Obviously, we wouldn't amend election procedures or results for trivial reasons. But yes, we should amend them, and we should make accommodations for serious issues that affected large numbers of people. For a clear, well-known cause. For example, if one tree falls across the road, 5 people or 25 people are blocked on that day, I think the rights of the rest of the state to have a speedy election might trump that. When thousands of trees fall and affect thousands of voters, and it's all over the news, and everybody knows what happened, that does require that situation to be addressed. It is messy and inconvenient to extend an election or to do supplemental mail-in ballots, but the right of voters to vote has to trump such concerns, even Puna voters, and even after a hurricane. There are 2 different categories of issues that I would like to try to explain that affected my constituents. Those that had delayed votings, I believe the numbers are 4-1 and 4-2, received numerous conflicting official announcements of how their election would be handled. I can show you a photograph from one of the closed polling sites on election day. It says you will be mailed a ballot within 21 days. People saw that, they got informed by the poll workers, they went home to locations where they had no electricity, no TV, no phone, no internet, and relied on that information. The idea that we could reach such voters with 3 days notice to tell them that we changed our plans on Monday afternoon is absurd. People who are, I'm here to say that there are people blocked into their homes as recently as yesterday. So there's nobody that saw, everyone didn't see the sign on the highway and a note home to parents from school kids. I don't have to tell everybody how unreliable that is. It's no way to notify people of an election. The second category of people are the thousands of people who were stranded and physically could not reach their polling place on election day, August 9th, who were assigned to the 2 polling places that were open. The Office of Elections had this information that despite reports that the highways were cleared, large numbers of people were still trapped in their neighborhoods. I know they had this information because I called them numerous times. I also called Civil Defense, the Governor's Office, the Attorney General, and my county clerk, who, by the way, was wonderfully responsive, Stuart Maeda, and helped me relay this information to the Office of Elections. And he informed me that the Office of Election had information that the roads were clear and there was no problem. And I understand that the Office of Elections jurisdiction may have ended at the time the polls opened. And I understand that your authority may not include deciding what happens to these voters. But the Governor's Office can be petitioned to extend this election. You guys could comment to the Supreme Court where the ACLU has represented us, who's going to represent us. You could create a situation that remedies what happened. There are several possible remedies. You could redo all 4 districts in the Pahoa area, which would be the right thing to do. You could redo the 2 that were open on election day, where, as Councilmember Ford and the statistics clearly show, large numbers of people were unable to vote on that day. You could also allow mail-in ballots or walk-in ballots to voters who signed a declaration that they were physically blocked by storm debris from getting to their polling places. Those are 3 possible remedies. Your job is to prevent future such occurrences like this, but my job is to represent to you the need to correct the election that's currently just happened. And I'm extremely concerned that my constituents were not allowed to vote. Why does it matter besides the theoretical right to vote and the importance of that right? There is a local race, maybe 2 local races that were close enough that when you look at the numbers of people that didn't vote, these elections remain undecided. I will illustrate one of those, which is County Council District 4, where by my calculations, about 80 voters separated an outright win from a runoff. You have a runoff election if someone doesn't get 50% of the vote. The leading candidate in that election is about 80 votes, by my calculation, over that runoff trigger. That candidate's neighborhood, going Paradise Park, did get to vote on the delayed election day. The early voting, the walk-in and absentee voting, showed a close race, triggering a runoff. Election day voting showed a close race, triggering a runoff. On the delayed voting, when one candidate's neighborhood got to vote, suddenly it was over 50%, no runoff. But, and I'll get specific here, one candidate named Roy Lozano lives in Pohoiki, and his constituency lives there. They were trapped by road debris on election day. They never voted. Another candidate, Matty Green, lives in Nanavali, one of the worst hit areas with thousands of people, which was almost completely blocked for 4 or 5 days after the hurricane. There's no way any Nanavali voters got to vote. So one can look at this race and say, oh, well, it wasn't close, what does it matter? It wasn't close because 2 of the candidates' constituencies and neighbors did not vote yet. I urge you to realize the importance of this fact. This is a skewed election. It was skewed by the random nature of which neighborhoods were allowed to vote and which weren't. That's not fair. These voters that didn't vote aren't lazy, they're not apathetic, they were physically blocked, they were impacted the most by this very serious hurricane. And then they were penalized by losing their right to vote by a bureaucratic decision over which it's not too late to correct. So I urge you to take steps that will allow this election to be completed. You've received, at least from my office, about 20 emails that we've received, about 30 declarations of voters that were unable to vote. And this doesn't count the phone calls that my staff so patiently took. And I can report from my experience of living here that thousands of people were denied a right to vote because of the hurricane. It's not fair. So I urge you to restore, we have voters, needless to say, and we've referred to them a little bit, voters who are not only frustrated but furious at the situation that occurred and the decisions that were made to disregard their actual situation on the ground. And tremendous loss of confidence in the election due to these decisions and other irregularities, as has been discussed. So I urge you to please restore fairness, restore the confidence, and allow us to complete this election by restoring democracy even to junior voters. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Is there a solution to have the districts revote?
I think there are 3 solutions. One is all 4 precincts could revote, which would be the fairest. or the 2 precincts that opened on election day, which should not have opened because large numbers of those constituents were could not vote. Or you could have a mail-in or walk-in vote simply among people who sign a declaration saying the store physically presented me for voting. I'm not addressing people who wanted to stay home or working for water rights. I'm talking about people who physically could not get down to vote. I think those are 3 remedies available. Any of them would be a great improvement on the current situation. Perhaps the voting for those that were blocked would be the simplest to do. Revoting all 4 precincts would be the fairest to do. I leave it to your wisdom and judgment to decide what remedies should occur.
Any comments or questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I wasn't yelling, I was asked to speak loud. I'll take it. Thank you very much. I realize it's unusual to request this, but it relates to my main topic, which is that I forgot in my haste to mention 2 things. One is I do strongly urge the commission to hold a meeting on the Big Island. I think that is within your power to do so, and there's a reason why only 3 people spent the money and the whole day to come over here. It's because it's hard. So you're mostly hearing an Oahu perspective about a Big Island issue. So I urge you to consider holding a hearing on the Big Island, and then you'll hear from large numbers of voters that were affected. You don't have to take my word for it, to other people's word for it. Also, perhaps in the future, video testimony could be accommodated if you're not willing to go to the affected district to hear about it. Briefly, another thing I forgot to mention, in Keonepoko, where the delayed election was held, I mentioned the conflicting information about the conflicting announcements that occurred consecutively of different information, how they're going to hold it. In addition to that, there were no paper ballots available, as was briefly mentioned here. I know of at least 6 voters that walked out in indignation or in lack of trust of the process when there were no paper ballots available. I'm not sure if that's a legal right that we have, but it's a right that people at every other polling place have. The people on that day did not have it. There was no privacy provided for voters in Keonepoko, and I've seen the pictures of it, and I've heard the story of poll workers standing right next to someone with no side curtains. And there was no professional supervision of the electronic machines. That's in the delayed election. And briefly, although it's been represented that Puna had a big turnout, you know, the right to vote is not fungible. If one neighborhood gets to vote, it doesn't negate another neighborhood's right to vote. This becomes very important in local elections, where I repeat, one of our candidates has been active in Nanavali Community Association for decades. She's been president and vice president of her association. And I assure you, if you look at Nanavali's voting turnout, it's less than 10% of its normal. And its election day turnout was probably 0% because the entire neighborhood was blocked in. So there are people whose rights to vote were denied. It's possible that the extra interest in the US Senate race resulted in a large turnout for those who had that late vote allowed. But the people who were blocked in on election day simply have not voted yet. Those are the people I'm most concerned about. Thank you very much.